All right, so today, like I said, we're going to be talking a lot about Netgear, some of the switches that are available, but also some of the resources that are now available. And the first thing right off the bat is Netgear Academy is a free training course that you can take and get certified at on Netgear's website right now for free today. This is a class that will teach you the basics and fundamentals of building an AV over IP infrastructure. It's about 2.5 hours, 3 hours of videos. I ended up watching some of them a couple times to make sure that I was taking notes properly and trying to retain as much as I could. You take quizzes in between each section, and then at the end of the course, you take a 40-question test. If you score an 80 or above, you then are certified with level 1 certification for Netgear's AV over IP course. Like I said, it goes over AV over IP basics, network design and topology, VLANs and multicasting, switching and wireless networks, and then of course Netgear Enterprise Solutions, which just is their line of network switches. We'll go over this a little bit more at the end of the show, but right now I kind of just want to talk about why Netgear is so great for AV over IP. And the first thing is because they accept all forms of NDI. NDI is Network Device Interface and is kind of the backbone when it comes to AV over IP. NDI allows you to send a video and have it on your network, and then any other NDI compatible device can interact with that NDI destination. So you can have a PTZ camera on your network, and through NDI, you can get the video feed to your switcher, and then also be able to control that camera with either some kind of software or a physical joystick controller. And the beauty of Netgear with NDI is Netgear has profiles for every flavor of NDI. We started out originally with full bandwidth NDI, then NDI HX, HX2, and now we are on HX3, which seems to be the Goldilocks between full bandwidth and NDI HX2. Netgear has profiles not only for all of the different versions of NDI and NDI HX, but for the complete versions of NDI, and are constantly updating it. NDI is now on NDI 6.1, and Netgear is right there making profiles specifically designed for NDI 6.1 and being able to utilize the HDR and 10-bit color space. So it's really great that Netgear is, staying committed to AV over IP. But they're not just committed to NDI, they're also committed to Dante, which is another form of AV over IP. Dante is more well known for their audio, and of course, Netgear switches support Dante audio, but they also have profiles for Dante AV and Dante AV-H, which is their new video profiles as well. So Netgear is committed to both of them. And we will see in a little bit later too, Netgear is also committed to SMPTE 2110 on the M4350 switches, which we'll talk about in a minute here. The other beauty of using Netgear and NDI and just AV over IP in general is a lot of the times you can take advantage of having just one cable connected to your camera or encoder or controller. For example, if you wanted to connect a PTZ camera to a Netgear switch, as long as the camera is PoE compatible, you can send one cable, plug it into the back of your camera, and you can have video sent over that cable, you can have control sent over that single cable, and you can have power sent over that single cable. And we'll get into a little bit of how that power works with our terms to know with AV over IP. Now, again, a little bit of a foreshadowing here. If you want to learn more about these terms to know and even more terms that you should know when talking about networking, definitely recommend taking a look at that Netgear Academy first level course. Anyway, we were talking about PoE. Well, what is PoE? PoE stands for Power over Ethernet. And again, that is when your network switch is able to provide power to something, whether it's a camera, an encoder, a decoder, etc., etc. So typically there are three flavors of PoE. There is standard PoE, which is 15 watts. So one of the ports will be able to power up to 15.4 watts. Most of your encoders, decoders, or controllers are going to be PoE. When you step up to a camera, that is typically when we get to the PoE plus range. A camera has to move parts, it has to move the lens, it has to power the sensor. It's doing a little bit more, so it requires a little bit more power. And in this case, PoE plus is 30 watts. Last but not least is PoE++, which is 60 to 100 watts. There are different flavors of PoE++, but just for today, we'll say PoE++ includes anything that requires 60 to 100 watts. Typically, your broadcast cameras that are connecting to a network switch, something like a Panasonic UE160 is a perfect example. This is a much larger camera, therefore it requires more power to be able to turn, pan and tilt and zoom, move that big lens. So PoE++ is the highest form of PoE+. The thing that you need to take into consideration next is the total power delivery. So a network switch may have 8 ports on it with 110 watts of available power, and that would be the total power delivery. And that is the maximum amount of power that the switch can output. Now, you may be thinking to yourself, okay, well, why would I want to get an 8-port switch that is PoE+, so 30 watts per port, but if the total power delivery is only 110 watts? And the simple answer is not every device needs to be powered by the switch. For example, if you're going to connect a KiloView Cube R1 to your network switch, that has its own power supply. If you are going to be connecting a computer or a TriCaster or any other switcher to your network switch, that doesn't need power from the switch either. So you have your total power delivery, and for a lot of the switches, you can actually have it so each port can have a device connected to it and power it, but that's not always the case. So you do want to keep in mind the total power delivery along with whether or not each individual port is PoE, PoE+, or PoE++. Last thing that we want to talk about today is SFP, which is small form factor. Now, typically on an M4250 line of switches, the majority of your ports are going to be 1 gig ports. And when you're talking about especially NDI HX, even at 4K 60, you have plenty of overhead on that port. But if you are going to be combining 2 switches and each 8-port switch needs to be able to share all of that data between the 2 switches, you want to make sure that you have a higher throughput cable to be able to connect those. So a lot of the M4250s and M4350 switches will have a higher throughput port known as an SFP or SFP plus or SFP plus plus port on it, which can go all the way up to 100 gigs of transfer. And as you'll see in a second here, some of these switches can get pretty big, so you might need a 100 gig port on it. Now, in our example, we were just talking about an M4250 switch. We were talking about their desktop model switches, and there are 2 of these available. For the most part, they are very similar. Both of them have 8 ports on them. Both of them are PoE plus per port, but the differences start happening when you look at the total power delivery. The one on the left here, for $599.99, this only has 110 watts of available power. Now that again is still a great switch if you wanted to connect, let's say, 3 cameras and a controller to it, and then some of your other ports, again, being a KiloView Cube R1 or your switcher or something like that, a computer that you're using screen capture on. All of those devices need to be able to connect to your network, but some of those devices don't require power, so you don't need to have that overhead. Well, let's say you wanted to connect 4 or 5, maybe 6 cameras to your network switch. That's when we start looking at the switch on the right because it has 220 watts of available power. And at 7 cameras that are PoE plus, that would equal 210 watts of power usage. So you can have 7 out of your 8 ports be connected to a camera or a PoE plus device and not have to worry about running out of power, and then leaving that last one again for a switcher of some sort. But let's say you need more ports or you need more power. Don't worry, the rest of the M4250 line is there. And then this is just a small, slim pickings of some of our favorite switches here. One of my favorites is the second one from the bottom here, the GSM 4212PX. It has 10 1 gig ports on it, while also having 2 SFP plus ports on it. It's again a PoE plus switch, and you have 240 watts available. So that really does mean that all 8 of your PoE plus ports can have a 30-watt device connected to it, and you don't have to worry about any overhead whatsoever. But again, let's say you need more than 10 ports. You need more than 720 watts of power available. Well, that's when we start looking at the M4350 switches. And as you can see on here, I was not exaggerating when you can have upwards of 48 devices connected to these switches, but these are PoE++ switches, and you can have thousands of watts of power available to you, and then also having, again, those bigger SFP ports to be able to connect multiple switches together. Even if you do get an M4250 switch that has 8 ports to start, and then you want to move to a bigger switch on the M4350 line, you can still connect them via that SFP port. So there really is a switch all the way from a little 3-camera studio all the way up to broadcast levels. Now let's talk about some of the differences between the M4250s and the M4350s switches. The M4250 switches are designed for those smaller studios where you don't need to get over more than like 5 or 6 cameras. You can go up to like 20 or 24 ports in the M4250 line. Primarily, your ports are going to be 1 gig, but they do have 2.5 gig and 10 gig ports available to be able to daisy chain switches together. One of the great things about the M4250 switches is they can be mounted with the cables in the front in a rack or with the cables in the back in a rack. All of them can be mounted that way except for the desktop switches. Those are not rack mountable. But those desktop switches are very small, designed to sit on a desk, and they are very quiet. They don't make hardly any noise, so you don't have to worry about picking up the fans if you are in the same room as your cameras and microphones. Now again, once you get to these larger productions, that's when you're going to want to start looking at the M4350 lines of switches. They have ports that go all the way up to 100 gigs. We were talking about being able to get, potentially thousands of watts of power into these switches. That's when those redundant power supplies come into place. We talked about Dante, AV, and AVH. We talked about NDI, but again, the M4350 lines of switches, some of them are even SMPTE 2110 supported, which is again that broadcast level for AV over IP. And then also, when you are looking at some of the latest things coming out from Netgear, including their wireless access points, those are tending to be used with the M4350s because you do need to have a higher speed port connected to them. As you can see at the bottom there, the WBE710 requires a 2.5 gig port, and the WBE758 requires a 10 gig port to be able to handle the maximum bandwidth. So lots of different switches available, again, from small productions all the way up to much, much larger productions. Now, we talk about this list all the time, so I had to throw it in here, and we kind of covered a lot of this already, but here's the top 5 reasons why VideoGuys recommends the Netgear Pro AV M4250 of switches. They're engineered for AV over IP. As we said, they have all of these different AV over IP protocols and presets available for you to be able to use. Netgear is committed to Pro AV. We were just talking about the wireless access points that were only just introduced a couple months ago. Netgear is looking at the trends in the market right now when it comes to NDI, and you start looking at Kiloview's wireless encoders and decoders. You start looking at Atomos Connect with their ability to have their monitors be used as encoders or decoders, and you really start to look at things like the BirdDog X series cameras, which allow for wireless NDI control, and even with the BirdDog X4, truly wireless because it has a battery built into it. And Netgear sees the trend and says, all right, we're going to make wireless access points specifically designed for using AV over IP wirelessly. We talked about this as one of the first things. They have presets. I'm sorry, I skipped over number three. Number three, easy to configure GUI, especially when it comes to their Engage software, which we will talk in a second here. That's where you are able to implement the fourth reason of all of these presets for NDI HX6, NDI HX3, NDI 6.1, Dante AV. All of these different protocols are supported by the Netgear switches. And of course, they are recommended by all of our partners and manufacturers. Basically, anybody that is using AV over IP, they always, once they switch to a Netgear switch, they don't go back. And a bonus, it's usually our #1 tech support solution for NDI installations. If you have a PTZ camera and it's not seeming to work properly, one of the first questions that we're going to ask you is, what kind of network switch do you have? And if you don't have a Netgear switch, we're going to recommend that you purchase a Netgear switch, and usually that is all it takes. We briefly just mentioned Engage 2.0. This is a new firmware version for Engage. Engage is a software that you can download onto your computer to be able to configure a network switch, multiple network switches, and again, you can learn more about the Engage software and some of its latest features in that Netgear Academy class. And since we're talking about the Netgear Academy class, let's talk about that for another minute here. I took the class last week. Like I said, it's about 2.5 hours of videos. Some of them I watched a couple times just to make sure that I really understood it. I'm going to give you a high-level overview of what each of the modules was, and then you can go and check it out for yourself. So the first thing is, the first module goes over the OSI model, which is the 7 layers of networking. Next is the module on defining a network and kind of going over the importance of an Ethernet cable, breaking it down. Talking about network topology, we kind of mentioned the differences between the 1 gig and 10 gig and copper versus fiber and SFP ports, so you can get more in-depth information on that. The differences between unicast, broadcast, and multicast, which is communication methods over a network. Understanding your VLANs, your virtual local area networks, to help with optimizing your network and implementing security protocols. Network terminology overview, we kind of went over a couple of those with the PoE, SFP, and total power delivery, but you'll learn more like link aggregation, STP, MLAG, IGMP, and all of that. You'll get a very basic overview of the M4350 switches with their Enterprise Switch Series, another basic introduction to the Engage software, and then specifying the entire range of Netgear switches. And in that one, it was actually pretty cool because the way that they did the video is they said, all right, this customer, wants to use, 3 PTZ cameras and this encoder and that decoder. What switch should we use? And they break it down how you pick the right switch for a couple of those different examples. So it's really, really informative stuff, and I highly recommend taking advantage of it. Like I said, it is free. You just go to Netgear Academy, and it's free to take the class, and it only takes a couple hours. And since we're talking about resources that are available to you from Netgear that are free, I wanted to end on Netgear AV's support team, Pro AV Design at netgear.com. This is a free pre-sales consulting that you can get to make sure that you are picking the right switch for your network. And one of the great things about Pro AV Design at netgear.com is it's really not just pre-sale support. It's not them saying, this is the switch that you need, purchase it. They will explain to you why it's the right switch. They will explain to you how to set up your switch. And then, if you do decide to purchase the switch, you also get post-sale support. As you can see, they will help you with troubleshooting, if you're having any issues setting up your switch, if you are, overwhelmed, especially if you are going with these bigger switches or multiple switches, they will help you with that troubleshooting, and they will offer training and support kind of like Netgear Academy. So all of these resources are available to you from Netgear. And of course, we here at VideoGuys are very well versed in the Netgear line of switches. So you can absolutely give us a call as well, 800-323-2325. That was a lot of information on Netgear, but they absolutely deserve it. Like I said, our #1 tech support solution when it comes to AV over IP. Highly recommend checking out Netgear Academy. Highly recommend, if you have questions about Netgear switches, give proavdesign@netgear.com an email. And that's all I have to say today. So thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next Tuesday at 3 p.m. Eastern. Peace.
VideoGuys is available Monday through Friday. Give us a call at 1-800-323-2325. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter and Instagram to stay connected with all of our updates. And you can like us on Facebook. Keep an eye out for our live videos, and don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thanks for watching.